Come set your rule and reign in our hearts again.
Welcome back to New Community. I'm glad you showed up, and I hope you continue to show up. Before we continue, I just want to give you a forewarning. As you can see, the Chung Christmas tree is still up, and I want to let especially the cleanup freaks out there let you know that this tree will probably be up for another few months. It's not because we're lazy, but I have expressly requested to my family over the past 2 years to keep the Christmas tree up until at least Easter. Easter is the hard deadline for my family. It needs to come down before Easter, but it's because it helps me get through the winter months. It's a little bit of my happy place. So just asking you to show me some grace that way, especially for the cleanup freaks that are feeling a bit bothered that the Christmas tree is still up. Okay? So I hope you can handle that. Okay. That said, let's get into today's passage. Jesus, he is not afraid to confront just the big topics, the uncomfortable topics in life. And we are continuing on in his Sermon on the Mount. And of all the practical daily needs that he begins to address, we saw last week that the number one topic that he believed is most needed to be addressed amongst humanity is anger, which I think he's spot on. And now we see him turning to, broadly speaking, sexuality, and specifically speaking, addressing adultery. And I think that's spot on as well. It's almost like he had perfect foresight into Toronto life in 2020 and just seeing how sexualized our culture has become. That said, my summary of the passage and the sermon this past Sunday, I worded it with this prayer. Lord, satisfy me increasingly with Jesus' new covenantal love. And I offered that because I really believe that is the most effective power to fight or flee from our temptations. It's when our hearts become saturated with what Jesus has done for us. If you contrast that to the first covenant, God bound himself to his people, to Adam and Eve, and he expected Adam and Eve to bind themselves to God and to be perfectly faithful and to demonstrate perfect fidelity, but we know they failed that. And so Jesus comes along and says, I know that you can't fulfill this. In fact, your hearts are prone to wander from God, to commit adultery against God and adultery against one another. And so I am going to pursue you. Jesus' new covenant of grace is that Jesus first says, I'm going to bind myself to you. I'm going to pursue you. And to those who would place faith in him, to his church, I'm going to bind myself to you. And despite your inability to fulfill God's law, and despite your imperfections, now as you are in union with me by faith, I'm going to bind you back to God. And so that's the new covenant of grace. So I love how John Donne puts it in his holy sonnet, his love poem to God. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. You ravish me, I'll never be pure until you ravish me. John Donne is on point, and he's saying, I need your grace and your gospel, your new covenantal love to saturate me in the deepest places, the deepest pores of my soul and mind and body. And from there, that would become the most effective power to fight or flee from temptation. That whatever is dangling in front of us, we preach to our own hearts, Jesus is better than blank. And then whatever practical means that God provides as an out. It might look very commonplace and practical as going out for a walk and getting fresh air and stepping away from whatever it is that is dangling in front of you. It might be to simply build that mental habit and response and the physical habit to actually turn your eyes away. Very practical in that sense. Or it might be as practical as reaching out to a trusted group of friends and to look for that relational support. Ask them to pray for you. Ask them to be with you, to talk to you. Or it might be as Jesus did during his greatest temptation in the garden, to get on your knees and to battle it out in prayer and to cry out to God. But whatever means of grace that God provides, that by faith we look to Jesus as better, and because he is so worth it, and he is more beautiful than what is dangling in front of us, as he is our greater affection than these other lesser lustful affections and desires, we by faith fight the good fight in whatever practical means. So that said, if it's helpful for you, perhaps your facilitator has already prepared a roadmap for today. But if you need help, here are 3 sort of big questions to ask of the passage. And so I offer these as a roadmap. First, review why God cares so much to address adultery. What is God's deal with adultery? Why does Jesus start there with the 7th commandment of the 10 commandments? Second, review why Jesus has a "but I say to you" about adultery as well. Remember, this is Jesus's pattern. He identifies one of God's requirements in the law, and then he raises the standard even more strictly to show how impossible it is for us to attain perfect righteousness before God, and that something else has to happen in the heart. Remember, a whole point of the new covenant of grace is that Jesus gives us a new heart. The Holy Spirit births in us a new heart, a new set of affections to be much more Godward, and to long for the things of God. And then third, this isn't so much a question, but just to talk about how you fight temptation. I hope that increasingly you feel your new community is a safe place of grace, and whether you feel comfortable enough to name your temptation specifically or not, that at the least you would be able to address how you fight temptation, if it's without naming the specific temptation, but how you generally fight temptations. And so share your playbooks with one another. Share and encourage one another, strengthen one another, give each other ideas of how to practically experience God's grace in those moments and to find healthy outs in those moments of temptation. Now, just to get a bit more specific, as you talk about fighting temptation, I hope that you're able to share how you apply the gospel to your hearts more effectively. So on a soul level, and then on a practical action level, sharing just practical outs with one another. Okay? So as a final exhortation, I just want to remind you that, and I just hope and pray that your new communities become increasingly a wonderful, safe place of grace where you are building each other up. I hope everyone, by the end of the evening, they are leaving that place feeling built up, certainly challenged, certainly confronted with the truth of God, but being built up in the love of God. All right? So before I hand it over to your facilitator, here are some quick reminders of some invites. Women's New Community Potluck and Prayer is this Sunday. If you're able, ladies, join the ladies after service. Bring a dish if you are able to. Please come regardless. And it's going to be a time of fellowship and just sharing prayer requests and praying for one another. And then we are looking for waste disposal volunteers. If you're able to be part of a rotation on Tuesday evenings to help collect the waste in our building and then put it curbside, if you could please reach out to John Ferguson. Here is his email. And here are some other save the dates that are coming up. God bless. Have a great evening. Bye.
Build your